At the Combat Mage Academy, everyone agrees on one thing: there's no place for healers here. But our protagonist thinks otherwise. Win is the best healer, yet he's still enrolled in this academy. Everyone thinks he's going to fail miserably. One teacher even decides to prove it by arranging a mock battle. The teacher uses earth magic to trap Win, but he easily dodges every attack by boosting his speed with healing magic. The teacher almost catches him with an earth trap, but Win dodges it again. He then goes on the offensive, closing in and swinging his dagger. Of course, the attack has no effect. The teacher has covered his body in solid earth armor. He's confident that a weak healer with no combat magic could never touch him, but Win knows a way around this. In this world, most mages limit their power because their bodies can't handle their full true strength. Pushing past that limit would cause their bodies to collapse. But if Win removes that limit, that he can unleash an enormous amount of power at the cost of destroying his own body. And that's perfectly fine with him. After all, he's a healer. Win lunges forward with a punch brimming with power. Both of his arms shatter as he punches straight through the teacher's earth armor. The teacher doesn't even have time to react. He's taken down instantly. So why is a healer in this academy? Because last time everyone else was useless and Win died because of it. This is what happened back then. You'd probably think that being good at your job would earn you the respect you deserve from your seniors, right? Well, that wasn't true for our boy. He was actually stabbed by his superior for being too good at his job. Win was an ordinary young man with an extraordinary healing ability, a one-of-a-kind power that only he possessed in the entire world. He could easily heal even the most horrific wounds like it was child's play. Lost an arm, no big deal. This guy could regenerate it from the stump in mere seconds. Currently, he's serving with the last remaining soldiers, on the front lines fighting against the demon army led by the demon lords, the very force that ravaged the Ranban kingdom. Soldiers are fighting for their lives, trying their best to push back the demonic forces that have wiped out the rest of the world. As for our boy, he has no combat experience, so he was assigned the task of healing the wounded, essentially pulling them back from the brink of death. But let's be real. These mere mortals stood no chance of surviving against the terrifying creatures crawling up from the depths of hell. That's why the soldiers constantly returned with missing limbs, and our boy diligently healed them. However, gradually the soldiers grew tired of fighting time and time again only to get injured once more. They had accepted their cruel reality. Their lives were already over. They would rather die on the battlefield and end this whole mess. That's precisely why our boy was stabbed by his own captain. The captain believed that Win couldn't understand the pain and horror the soldiers endured every time they were forced back onto the battlefield. In the end, the despairing soldiers abandoned the defensive line, allowing hordes of giant monsters to begin ravaging the kingdom's ruins. Win watched helplessly as everyone died right before his eyes as his homeland crumbled. Looking up at that colossal dragon, he finally understood the terror those soldiers had been through. In that very moment, his greatest strength became his greatest regret. If only he had been capable of fighting on the battlefield, he could have ensured the survival of those around him. With a burning desire to protect the kingdom with his own two hands, he picked up a pebble from the ground and started charging towards the dragon. Of course, the ridiculous attempt of fighting a mighty dragon with just a stone led to his death. Predictably, however, he woke up nearly 5 years in the past, right before he earned the title of the world's greatest healer, a title he would later come to despise. Determined not to repeat his past regrets, he decided to enroll in an academy specializing in combat magic instead of healing. And his first choice was the Swarth Academy, a school dedicated solely to the art of combat in this world. The art of healing and the art of combat magic cannot coexist, forcing young mages to choose only one profession. However, Win decided to break this unwritten rule and achieve what he failed to in his previous life. He planned to use his knowledge from his past life to train himself so that he wouldn't just know how to heal, but also how to fight on his own. To start, he had to enroll in one of the most prestigious academies in this world, Swarth Academy. It's believed that this academy can nurture young talents into first-rate combat mages, not to mention the most talented combat mage from Win's past life, also graduated from this very academy. However, there's one problem: Win is a healer, so getting into Swarth won't be easy. Normally, nobles have to spend a fortune to get their foolish children admitted into this academy, but our boy is currently broke. Even if he started earning a living with his healing skills, he wouldn't be able to save up enough money before the enrollment deadline. While he was pondering his difficult situation, his little sister entered the room. Seeing his sister alive and well brought tears to his eyes. Noticing her brother's reaction, she assumed he must have a stomachache to be crying like that. He quickly wiped his tears and lied that something had gotten in his eye. but deep down he could barely contain his joy at seeing his sister alive. He swore that this time he would protect his sister from the disaster that had claimed her life before. And not just her, he would make sure to protect everyone he hadn't been able to save. An idea suddenly flashed in his mind. It seemed he had found his next move. But before we continue, here's a little background on the Magic Academy Federation. It's an organization that oversees all the magic academies in the kingdom, responsible for issuing regulations and curricula for all magical education. At this point in time, the president of the Federation was also the headmaster of the academy, but for some reason, this president had completely stopped paying attention to the Federation. The reason quickly became clear. It was because of his gravely ill granddaughter, Mary. By the way, the name of this doting grandfather is Analungo Grande, president of the Magic Academy Federation and headmaster of Swast Academy. The old man had promised the little girl he would find a talented healing mage who could free her from her suffering. However, in our boy's previous life, his granddaughter passed away because the president couldn't find a skilled mage in time. That is precisely why our friend snuck right into the president's granddaughter's room. As it happened, our boy didn't even need to introduce himself. The president was already there. The old man already knew about the scholarship student from Helix. After all, Win was famous throughout the kingdom for the outstanding talent he possessed in healing magic. This was why the president felt it was improper for someone with our boy's talent to be sneaking around like a thief. In his heart, Win admitted he was right. Perhaps without the experience from his past life, he wouldn't have dared to invade someone's private space. But on the other hand, etiquette was a luxury they couldn't afford. He had to act now because only he could cure the girl. Of course, the old man knew that nothing comes without a price, and he wanted the young man to state his intentions clearly. Win emphasized that time was of the essence. The girl's treatment had to take priority over negotiations. Finally, the old man gave our boy permission to act. He sat on the edge of the bed, ready to cure the girl of her illness, but the old man's sharp gaze caught his attention, staring straight into the boy's soul. The president was almost implicitly warning him that one mistake and our boy would be finished. So Win took a deep breath, ready to make no mistakes, and began to cast his healing magic. While casting this healing magic, he realized his mana pool had shrunk compared to his previous life. But what was more important was the perfect execution of the healing magic formulas, which luckily he still remembered very clearly. After a moment, the granddaughter finally opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was the charming prince who had saved her from the brink of death. She was completely flustered and rolled to one side in embarrassment meanwhile. Her grandfather still couldn't believe that his grandchild had actually awakened from her coma. The little girl spoke softly, confirming she was awake. She even said that. It had been years since she'd felt this well. The doting grandfather's eyes filled with tears of joy. The worries that had weighed on his heart for so long were finally lifted, and it was all thanks to our boy. A while later, the two men sat down to talk in the living room. After expressing his profound gratitude, the old man was ready to grant any of Win's wishes. Win reassured him that he wouldn't ask for anything unreasonable. His wish was entirely within the president's power at this time. Everyone knew that no one could match Win in healing magic. He was already at the pinnacle with no more limits to overcome. That was precisely why. He wanted to explore a completely different skill set. He wanted to enroll in Squash Academy. Of course, the old man found this ridiculous for someone to abandon their natural gift, to explore something completely unfamiliar. It sounded unusual, but since he had made a promise, he would keep his word. He shook the young man's hand, promising to honor their agreement. Somewhere in the academy, a rather toxic-looking teacher was reviewing the boy's admission file. He found the president's actions quite reckless, letting a healing mage with no attack skills into a combat school. Finally, the first day of school arrived, and the new students gathered in the academy's hall. On the podium, the president stood praising and flattering his academy. Squash Academy is a boarding school specializing in attack magic with a unique curriculum. The school's vast campus possesses numerous training grounds, and everything is made even better with advanced research facilities and a huge library which makes it stand out even more. Influential graduates are still active outside the academy, helping the school receive various forms of support from the kingdom. In short, no other academy offers an environment like this to study the fine arts of attack magic. Don't forget that our boy is just a little healing mage enrolling here, something completely unprecedented. So it goes without saying that the road ahead for him will be full of thorns, but our boy is ready to face anything as long as he can become the attack mage he has always dreamed of being. However, reality is often far from expectations. The first class after the opening ceremony took place, and Win was sweating bullets. He had to hit a target with a fire-type spell somehow. He managed to cast the fire spell, but it fizzled out as soon as it appeared. And this wasn't the first time this had happened. To make matters worse, his teacher was a real piece of trash. He used this weakness to push Win around. Win would only be allowed to attend class if he hit the scarecrow, until he could do that. He was forced to continue training in the training area on the other side of the school building. Win begged the teacher to at least guide him through the basics, otherwise he'd never be able to learn properly. But it was clear from the very beginning. This teacher held a grudge against our boy. To him, wasting time teaching a healer wasn't a wise investment at all. Win begged him to at least allow him into the library to learn something from theory. But once again, that bastard humiliated him just because he was a healer. He declared there were no materials here for his kind. Taking advantage of the situation, a blonde-haired bastard struck him down with a vicious magical sneak attack. It sent Win collapsing to the ground. The poor boy didn't even see the surprise attack coming. But the bully used it as an excuse to trample on such a weak healer. He arrogantly boasted about the Academy's offensive status, saying that frail healers like Win should get lost for even daring to enroll. This is the first time I've seen a teacher team up with a bully to torment a student. The two of them stomped on Win as if he were trash, the lowest form of scum in their eyes. That night, the young man lay collapsed on a stone bench, exhausted from his efforts to learn attack magic so far. It had all been for nothing. He knew things would be incredibly difficult simply because of the difference between healing and attack magic. Both harness their own unique sources of energy. Mana is the power of the mind, the ultimate weapon of a mage activated through formulas. Mana also moves according to the caster's will. Using that mana to create explosions or firepower results in attack magic. On the other hand, healers possess static mana, but that's where Sword Academy comes in. They are the best at training attack mages, so there must be a way for him to refine dynamic mana. Win had a strong belief that he could manipulate his own mana, converting it from static to dynamic. The biggest obstacle in his way right now, he couldn't even attend class because that bastard teacher wouldn't allow it. Win was determined not to give up, hoping he could meet the one who helped him in his past life just because she had decided to enter this academy. Perhaps that would make up for all the bitterness he had to endure. Unfortunately, he couldn't just rush in blindly, so he had to think of other ways. But suddenly, a familiar voice spoke up, scolding him for staying up so late. Win looked at the magnificent figure of this person. He recognized Veronica, an exceptionally outstanding female warrior who had once fought side by side with him. She was one of the highest-class attack mages he had ever known, and in the end he had to suffer the pain of her death in that tragic war. Fortunately, in this reversed timeline, she was still alive. But before they could even speak, this woman drew a sword capable of splitting anything in two. She looked like a female version of Gojo, but with the powers of Sukuna. Having her point a sword at him wasn't pleasant at all. But it turned out she was hunting a suspicious student around campus, which made her suspect Win was that troublemaker. Our boy hurriedly clarified that he wasn't that guy at all, because if she swung that sword at him, he'd need Truck-kun to isekai him all over again. She believed him, helping him calm down, and he spoke up to confirm if she really was Veronica. The woman felt offended that he was speaking so casually to a teacher. This left him both shocked and embarrassed. He knew she was older than him in his past life, but not by that much. It turned out she was a genius who skipped grades and was promoted to a professor immediately. This wasn't surprising at all, considering her god-tier talent. This was the opportunity Win had been waiting for, a shooting star that could finally help him learn attack magic. Win expressed his desire to join Veronica's class because he knew she was his last hope. He asked about the registration procedure, but she immediately refused, stating that she hadn't opened any classes. As a new teacher promoted after skipping numerous grades, she wasn't familiar with how things worked here. This year, Veronica's current position was as a teaching assistant to answer certain questions. The initial plan was to use her youthful mindset to connect with students of a similar age, making her a solid support system for them. However, what annoyed her was that no one dared to approach her for advice on anything. Our boy knew exactly why. It was because this woman was ready to pull out her deadly weapon at the slightest inconvenience. But from his perspective, this was a perfect opportunity to use Veronica. He didn't even need to join her class. He could ask her for private tutoring. So he asked her a question, knowing it was her duty to answer. Very bluntly, the boy asked how a healer like him should approach learning attack magic. From those words, Veronica immediately realized he wasn't an ordinary student after sensing his strange mana flow. It was then she suddenly remembered that this kid was the infamous first year who had just joined Sword Academy. She admitted that in all her years, she had never seen a normal healer try to learn attack magic. The good news at Swarth is that the Academy provides a method to cultivate something called dynamic mana. That was the foundation our boy believed would be the perfect start, and when Veronica confirmed this method's existence, Wynn was extremely excited, thinking he still had a chance. There was just one small problem. This woman bluntly declared that an idiot like him wouldn't be able to learn attack magic even with that method. This revelation truly stunned the boy, especially when Veronica explained that he already had too much static mana. This meant that even if he were to cultivate dynamic mana from scratch, most of it, eventually it will be converted and fuse with the static mana. And if you try to cultivate dynamic mana through a different method, the mixing of the two types of mana will make it so you can never use attack magic. Reality was too grim. Our boy transferred academies despite everything, only to realize that an ordinary healer had absolutely no way of learning attack magic. Wynn started to regret not getting an instruction manual when Truk-kun sent him back to the past, but he didn't want to give up, even if it meant becoming the Einstein of this era to invent a new method. He thanked the assistant professor and was about to leave when suddenly Veronica called him back to finish what she was saying. She continued her unfinished story, saying that although healers can't use attack magic, there is one exception that allows a healer to become an attack mage. This girl's words made his head spin because even our boy couldn't process that logic. Veronica proved her point by drawing a specially forged iron sword, a weapon that can cut, kill, and defeat enemies. Then she pointed to the wooden bench next to them, which is used for sitting. In other words, this simple-minded professor was stating the obvious, like how water is wet and the floor is made of flooring. But here's the twist. She lifted the bench and explained that even if she used it to smash someone's skull in, it would still be a type of weapon. Funnily enough, Wynn started to wonder how the heck this muscular woman could lift such a heavy bench with such slender arms. Anyway, Veronica's point was that even if an object is made for one purpose, we can still use it any way we want. To give a concrete example, she used her own hand and gently patted his cheek, making the guy turn his head. This was the wet dream of many men, until she flicked him so hard it stung, explaining that she had just used her hand for two different purposes. She'd accidentally hit him a bit too hard, but the meaning didn't change. The same thing, but used differently. Wynn's eyes finally lit up. He began to wonder if he could use healing magic as an attack. All this time, he had never even considered the idea. The core reason the two schools of mages were always at odds was the difference in their mana forms. But in Veronica's eyes, this kid was completely different. She believed he had taken a leap of faith by enrolling in the Attack Magic Academy, and his own mana showed that he wasn't just a simple healer. Even Wynn hadn't noticed this subtlety, making him wonder if this was one of the special abilities Truk-kun had given him. Placing her blade against his neck, she ordered him to wise up and awaken the fierce desire to fight deep within his soul. If he could do that, he would become unbeatable and crush anyone who dared to stand in his way. The next day, our boy was still pondering his conversation with the teacher. Since yesterday, she had used all sorts of examples to prove her point, and what really surprised him was why she seemed to have no prejudice against ordinary healers. And the fact that she could come up with such a logical theory on the spot made Wynn begin to suspect that she herself was using this method. But his train of thought was cut short by an instructor who rudely called him healer. Today's class was special as it would feature a series of one-on-one sparring matches. He was perfectly capable of participating with the others. Of course, whether he could actually use attack magic or not was his own problem to solve. That garbage teacher had also finalized the matchups. And to no one's surprise, he pitted our boy against Upus, that blonde-haired bastard from the other day. He had no interest in fighting Upus because that kid came from a prestigious noble academy and had all the support in the world. He was a rich kid born with a silver spoon, but more importantly, he was actually a powerful attack mage. Already confident of his victory, he started spewing insults, sarcastically wondering if Wynn would run home crying to his mommy after getting beaten to a pulp. He was trying his best not to fall for this moron's provocation. Even though he was from the future and knew he was facing a brat, his blood was still boiling. Luckily, Wynn wanted to test Veronica's theory in practice, so he started to get interested in the match. He got the professor's attention and firmly refused to back down. Instead, our boy made a proposal, admitting that he had no talent for attack magic and that this match would just be a waste of time. He raised the stakes and boldly declared that he would voluntarily drop out of SWAT Academy if he lost this match. The professor was overjoyed to hear those words, but in return, if he won, he would be allowed to join the regular classes. It was a humiliating proposal, but Upus was too arrogant. He burst out laughing and said the thought of Wynn winning was ridiculous. He even thought Win was living in a fantasy world and had zero chance of victory. The instructor was fed up and accepted the proposal, ordering both fighters into position. He gave the signal to start the match, and Upus smugly unleashed his attack magic. He summoned a barrage of dazzlingly bright short swords. This was his special technique called sword creation magic. Basically, this guy was like a cheap knockoff version of Gilgamesh, using those tiny swords as projectiles. Launching them all at Win, he roared that a low-class healer like him would have no way of blocking them. But our boy just stood there in a meditative pose, ready to deploy his domain. The moment the skill activated, he matched the speed of the swords and dodged them all cleanly. This was the life manipulation technique which Win used to control the egos of living creatures around him, amplifying their life force to its absolute limit. But that wasn't all. He could also use this approach to launch an attack as his aura continued to flare up in that stance. He caught one of the cheap Gilgamesh's short swords before striking down the others with the cool demeanor of Shiro Emiya. The weapons shattered, and he hadn't dealt a single point of damage. But our boy was just getting warmed up, and with just a single dagger he planned to end this fight. The onlookers couldn't comprehend what had just happened. The sight of a healer launching an attack was truly beyond their imagination. In fact, Win had been using healing magic to attack the whole time without ever touching actual attack magic. Upus was cornered and started making excuses, claiming that up until now, he was just going easy on him. It seems the guy can duplicate his daggers, as if that would change the outcome. He frantically unleashed a shimmering golden rain of daggers down on him, but our boy just calmly sliced through them one by one. When the defensive barrage was over, they all shattered on the ground. Upus, still delusional about his own power, enlarged his tiny short sword, and damn, that camera angle looks a little suggestive. Anyway, Win knew that fighting Upus was a hassle because of his talent and understanding of magic. To increase the complexity and firepower, Upus made the short sword spin. To put it bluntly, he was launching a missile at him. He even borrowed a move from Sukuna's playbook, but in the end, Win blocked that too. Upus couldn't copy any more moves from other series and could only roar in desperation. Meanwhile, our boy thought he should gradually increase his power. The ferocious blade was deflected with ease, leaving Upus utterly stunned. Before he could even react, Win used Goku's instant transmission to appear behind him and promised to heal him after this was over. Then he went straight for the finishing blow. But the instructor suddenly intervened, raising a huge wall of earth between the two. The instructor declared the match was over and told them both to step back to make way for the next pair. This defeat dealt a critical blow to the nobleman's pride, while Win was ecstatic. Because from now on, he could attend the official classes no matter how bitter that damn teacher was. After cleaning up, he took off. Reflecting on his recent combat experience, he had finally created his own version of attack magic, one powerful enough to take down an elite mage. It was all thanks to Veronica's guidance. As for that scummy loser, he was being helped up by the instructor. Upus asked the teacher not to report this match to his father. Both of them were like genuine Reddit haters, the kind who can never accept defeat. In the next scene, we see Win in class. He can finally attend classes here and strengthen his knowledge of attack magic. The instructor walked in and glared at Win before starting the lecture. So far, his lessons were only at a basic level. Essentially, one homeroom teacher would handle all the subjects. Win was most interested in the magic tool creation class, which reminded him of a similar subject at the Healing Academy. Today's lesson was on how to make ice bombs. The teacher would hand out materials for the students to assemble and craft themselves. Win recalled that in his previous life he never actually forged weapons. He only made recovery items, but at this attack academy, he was required to learn how to forge weapons for combat. The magic source for this. It was obviously dynamic mana, but when it comes to crafting, the nature of the magic doesn't matter much. That's why Win wouldn't run into any trouble, even with his surplus of static energy. And when examining the materials, he found shards of an ice golem and powder from a blazing branch. Following the instructions, he mixed the shards, but he suddenly felt a dizzying change. Win ended up throwing the ice shard. By reinforcing his body, he caused the small fragment to explode and splatter, leaving sharp ice spikes everywhere. Our boy was quite impressed, but his little stunt here was seen as the height of disrespect to the class. The instructor scolded him and bluntly said he would deduct Win's points. The other bullies laughed, especially Upus, which showed he was colluding with the teacher. Win's next class, Magical Creatures, was about to begin. He received a cute salamander, while the instructor emphasized that the low-level students had to listen very carefully. Our boy was a little uncomfortable being so close to a magical creature. This tiny killing machine spat out a cannon-like stream of fire, forcing Win to knock it away. In reality, that was just something our boy imagined in his head. This, however, still caught the instructor's attention, who promptly confiscated his trusty pot. Things were not looking good, and Win was starting to understand what was really happening. The instructor let him join the class, but was actually tormenting him in every single lesson. This meant he wouldn't learn a thing, so he had to do something to solve this situation. Once again, watching him from a distance was a strange female student, who seemed to understand the double standard at play here. The bullying continued endlessly. Win not only had to protect himself from the students, but also had to deal with the instructor's ridiculously off-topic questions. His grades were getting crushed, and even after school he'd find piles of trash dumped in his room. When he tried to question the supervisor about this issue, that person punished him even more severely by taking away his dinner privileges. Our boy was getting beat down from all sides. He collapsed in his room, realizing this academy was full of haters. Just when he'd taken the positive step forward, he now faced a pile of garbage challenges to overcome once again. Win understood that his current rate of progress was bringing him great things, and he didn't want to let these bullies bother him. The best part was he had already fought one of them, and actually won, and so he had absolute proof that he could become the attack mage he'd always dreamed of. Focusing on the positive side, Win recalled buying the textbook. Now he could review his homework and study properly. The next day arrived, and he was completely shocked to see no sign of the teacher or anyone else around. The instructor usually arrived at this time, but there was only one student standing near him, as if the announcement about the sudden schedule change hadn't been shared with certain students. Annoyed, Win got up to strike up a conversation with the girl. He approached her, startling her with his sudden appearance. Our boy just wanted to know if the classes had been changed overnight, and sure enough, there was something more to it. The instructor hated certain students, and she was on that list, so both of them were screwed. She figured it was a good idea for two lonely, bullied outcasts to get to know each other. Win could sense her fear, so he cheerfully held out his hand, offering his friendship. The girl was stunned and bowed her head with absolute respect for him. She introduced herself as Erica Glenn, the first friend Win made at the new academy. She thought it was completely normal for him to have no one by his side, considering he enrolled late and was a healing mage. Erica emphasized that people were always talking about how pathetically weak healing mages were, which stunned Win. She herself wasn't one to brag about her friends, even though she was an attack mage. Observing her personality, Win understood that the harsh discrimination against healing mages seemed to be part of the Swast Academy's culture. It was true that attack mages fought on the front lines, so they had every reason to look down on the healing mages in the rear. Even in his past life, Win was known as a healing mage. He was renowned in the kingdom and had prestige back then, but at this attack academy, things were different. Win would be swallowed up by this academy's discrimination if he didn't fight back against it. Erica asked about his intentions for joining an attack academy. Gathering his thoughts, Win replied that he refused to accept the reality of being born a healing mage and intended to join the front lines. His reason shocked her, but Win made it clear that he had personal reasons to back it up. As for Erica's purpose, it seemed she came from a small, noble family in the countryside. Since her family had no sons, her parents thought their bloodline would end. Taking the burden upon herself, she thought that becoming a powerful attack mage would allow her to become the head of the family through status alone. It was an understandable goal in Win's eyes, but Erica's problem was that she didn't have a single shred of magical talent. She also had no friends and was bullied in class. Fortunately, she was happy to have befriended our boy, calling him a poor student who would comfort her even if her grades were miserably low. The guy gets put down everywhere, but she was just joking. Anyway, he reminded her that her expectations would soon be met. Without further explanation, Win took her to another classroom where the real class was taking place. The two of them found their way to the real class only to have an instructor who was as predictable as day consider them late. Win apologized for not knowing about the sudden class schedule change, but this jerk was extremely difficult and wouldn't let them off. To punish Win, he decided to hit him with another question. This was truly bad news. Erica knew that our boy hadn't attended most of the previous classes. This meant he wouldn't know a damn thing. Looking up at the board, Win analyzed the problem in his head while the teacher stressed that he would lose points if he didn't give the correct answer. Upus continued to mock Win, knowing he was on the verge of failure. But our kid was deep in concentration, so he picked up the chalk and began writing continuously non-stop. Every word he wrote captured the attention of the entire class. Even Upus thought this was just an attempt to show off. The truth was, Win had found the exact structure lighting up the entire magic circle on the board. He shattered everyone's expectations, leaving the entire room speechless, including his terrible instructor. The teacher was forced to admit that it was the correct answer, leaving Upus and Erica completely stunned. No way. This newbie had managed to decode the answer even after skipping all the classes, right after that uncomfortable class. Erica immediately wanted to know how. How could he solve that question? Win explained that it was actually quite easy to solve because he had studied from the textbook. He'd read the textbook, so he knew what to expect. What amazed her most was that this guy had devoured the entire damn book in a single night. Win had only read it for the first time and had just skimmed through it, praising it as one of the greatest books on attack magic. It covered basic and advanced applications. Everything was included with profound detail. He could have studied it all on his own, but without some form of understanding of magic reading, that text would have been pure torture. Win's strong point was that he was always good at theoretical studies, so he managed without finding it too difficult. He learned all about attack magic in a single night, reading it as casually as if it were a fantasy novel. While he found it interesting, Erica here was terrified. The book he had just digested was the stuff of nightmares for their academy, something that was impossible to decipher without a teacher's guidance. She began to regret her initial assumption of calling him a failure, and realized that she was the only one who was truly at the bottom. The girl didn't want him to leave her behind at the lowest rank, while our boy assured her that he would teach her anything she had trouble with. After all, they were close classmates. Erica smiled brightly, happy to receive his help. In reality, our boy was at school for his own goals, not to play the good friend role powered by friendship, but since he was a loner, he was going to need Erica. So, he told her about a favor he needed from her. The next class was Composite Attack Magic, a class he'd never been able to pass, and it was the main reason he could never get into the other classes. Erica figured he'd pass it easily, now that he'd beaten Unpissed. But the reality was different. Win couldn't actually use composite attack magic like other people, but he had a brilliant idea. This plan required Erica's help for it to succeed. In the next scene, the students are gathered at the training grounds again. When it comes to attack magic, there are two branches: composite magic and unique magic. Composite magic refers to spells with a well-defined structure, making them easily accessible to anyone through formulas. In contrast to that common method, unique magic is etched from within the user, like Unpissed's special knife creation magic. The Academy's curriculum includes classes for both types of attack magic, but for students to hone their skills. Of course, unique magic doesn't have a single correct answer, so for someone like our guy, this was actually the easiest path for him to get into those classes and win. Unfortunately, he struggled with basic attack magic, and his teacher knew this all too well. Taking full advantage of the healer class student, the instructor praised his theoretical skills and wondered how he would do in the practical portion. After all, Win was sure to fail this class if he couldn't even use basic magic. The instructor stressed that this exercise was no different than the previous ones, with the goal being to hit the bullseye. He then humiliated Win again by calling it an extremely basic exercise, meaning that if he failed at something so fundamental for the academy, he wouldn't be able to graduate. Gathering his thoughts, the instructor recalled how the boy applied healing magic to his attacks and how that healing magic improved his body's overall stats. But this was different because Win couldn't use anything remotely like attack magic. He just wanted this kid to get lost and drop his class. But our boy wasn't going anywhere and just smiled at the situation. The instructor was completely stunned to see Win's hand engulfed in a sea of flames. There was no earthly reason that could explain why this kid could cast magic like that. But don't be fooled. This was actually just a clever tactic our protagonist was using. His entire strategy hinged on Erica creating a fireball using her version of basic attack magic. He then placed the fireball inside a salamander's tail. Next, Win carefully used his auto healing ability to stoke the flames, hiding them within his palm. Basically, he was doing the same thing Gojo Satoru does with his reversed curse technique to maintain Limitless. It's infinite healing, but even so, Erica was still suspicious of his approach, wondering just what kind of person she was dealing with, unaware that he had once been humanity's greatest healer. In any case, he stopped the healing the instant he opened his hand, creating the illusion that he had just summoned a fireball from his palm. Next came the easy part. He just had to launch it at the target, taking it down with a perfect bullseye. As for the instructor, he was shaking like a leaf. His student had humiliated him yet again. The illusion was so realistic that he was completely convinced Win had cast attack magic, earning him an immediate passing grade. This earned him a round of applause from Erica and utter confusion from the onlookers. On top of that, Unpissed was furious. After class, he confronted the teacher to demand an explanation. Neither of them had any idea what was happening. There was no logical reason Win could have learned basic attack magic. Unpist's ego was severely wounded from the defeat he'd suffered, and now this healer was taking things too far. He was willing to go as far as complaining to his father to get the class shut down. Even the teacher was stunned by his coercion, while the arrogant noble stormed off, ordering the instructor to do whatever it took to get that healer out of their class for good. The wretched teacher was now in a bind, since breaking the rules came with the risk of being discovered. Unfortunately for him, he'd also worked his ass off just to get this job at the academy, so he couldn't afford to lose it now. Weighing the risks, the instructor decided it was better to take a gamble and get rid of the healer trying to make a name for himself at their academy. He was now in a bitter rivalry with a 15-year-old student and finally decided to handle the matter himself. After class at the training grounds, the instructor called Win aside. He threatened our boy, but Win, too dense to realize the gravity of his situation, took it as a compliment. The instructor shared that he wanted to crush the kid's confidence, especially after the kid skipped so many classes when he first joined the academy, even though it wasn't our boy's fault, because this terrible teacher had refused to let him attend those classes from the very beginning. Win argued back, saying he had already learned the material from his friends and through self-study, so there was nothing to worry about, but this teacher was acting like a total tyrant and couldn't care less. Believing this new lesson was necessary for Win, he, as the instructor, decided on the lesson's content right then and there. They would be participating in a real sparring match. Win found it pretty suspicious to have to fight his teacher for no reason, and the instructor knew this was unfair. So he gave the boy a handicap. If Win could land even a single blow, he would be considered the winner of this little test. With this advantage, the instructor expected the kid wouldn't run away and would actually fight seriously. Of course, this clown never even considered the possibility of losing. That's how confident he was in his own abilities. As for our boy, he was lost in thought, piecing the situation together. The kid accepted the terms of the match just as the teacher wanted. The battle began immediately with the instructor using earth magic from under the ground. Luckily, Win had some understanding of his teacher's fighting style. He knew this guy specialized in earth magic, so he quickly dodged the first attack, but that very attack sprouted spikes, forcing him to dodge again. Win was being cornered by countless attacks, but he was still dodging them systematically. The teacher taunted him for only being able to dodge, but the current problem for Win was dealing with that annoying earth magic. It could be unleashed in a relentless barrage. Not to mention his attacks had a massive range completely different from anything before. At the same time, he still hadn't given in. He entered an ultra instinct state, with every dodge closing the distance and rushing towards the teacher, who was activating more of his earth magic. He raised 2 walls on either side and then slammed them shut, trapping the boy in the middle. This move seemed to be the final blow, until he saw his student descending from the air with a dagger in hand. This was the only chance he had, so Win plunged the dagger straight down at the teacher's head. Unfortunately, the man had created the solid layer of armor blocking the strike. The student was forced to dodge the instructor's next attack, creating distance once again. This snake called his student pathetic and revealed his omnipotent killing armor. Even Win thought the name was cringy. While the teacher mocked him for using a knockoff version of basic attack magic, he contemptuously berated and crushed his student's confidence for daring to harbor the illusion of becoming an attack mage. However, the humble student confidently reminded the instructor that healing magic had allowed him to study the human body in extreme detail. Thanks to this, he understood that most people restrain their power so they don't kill themselves, as their own bodies can't handle their full strength, and exceeding that limit would leave their bodies debilitated. The instructor took that as an insult, thinking Win was trying to lecture him, but the kid's point was actually very simple. If someone could remove the limiters on the human body, they could unleash enormous power at the cost of severe physical damage. But the lucky thing for Win is that he's a healing mage, so he was preparing to pull a move just like Izuku Midoriya. He was perfectly fine with his arm shattering in the process. The boy's determination stunned the instructor as he calmly and coolly strode towards him, who still thought his embarrassing armor would be completely unscathed. Deku was about to unleash his Texas Smash. Oh, damn it, wait, wrong story. The teacher screamed as Win shattered his armor with a single punch. He didn't just break the armor, he bruised the guy's face worse than Jake Paul in a fight with Anthony Joshua. Win reminded his dear instructor not to judge a student's destiny, and felt a warmth in his heart as he recalled Veronica's guidance. She was the only reason he was able to unlock the overwhelming power he now possessed from his healing magic. Win knew he could become much stronger, but while he was lost in thought, the instructor sneak-attacked him with another earth pillar. Luckily, he managed to dodge it. But that wasn't enough to quell the man's seething rage. Win didn't expect to be attacked so suddenly, especially since he'd already met the test's condition. The instructor started spouting utter nonsense, claiming there were no witnesses to confirm it, meaning that theoretically a healing mage never landed a hit on him. He refused to admit defeat at the hands of some annoying healing mage, and unleashed countless more earth magic spells at our boy. Win was starting to get really tired of this trashy Seto. Kaiba-esque I make the rules attitude of this guy. But thanks to having removed his limiters, he could move at the speed of a rocket flashing past him once more. The instructor didn't even have time to process the sudden, overwhelming pressure from Win as the boy swung a fist that felt like 1,000 pounds ready to crush him a second time. Even that shameful armor couldn't form in time to save him from this devastating punch. But then the fist froze right before it could deform his face. The punch had stopped, as if the flow of time itself had completely frozen. Win's fist pressed right into his face, humiliating the instructor as he slowly began to feel the immense pain. This slow, shameful punch was even worse than taking the previous attack. This time he couldn't even run or scream to save his own skin. This scene is actually hilarious because this one punch takes up 50 comic panels. Finally, Win unleashed his true power and sent the man flying. Sending him crashing to the ground, it turns out our healing mage had been using another one of his tricks. He welcomes the teacher back to reality. He also explains that in reality, only a moment has passed, but not to worry. Unlike the teacher who didn't bother explaining a damn thing, he clarifies everything that happened. First, when Win's punch landed, he activated an illusion-enhancing charm. This spell was originally used to treat people with weakened senses like their eyesight, but recently, our boy has been using it in combat to increase his speed and reflexes. Basically, he can activate it on an opponent, stimulating their senses to the absolute limit, making them perceive 1 second as if it were 100 seconds. This makes the blow infinitely more painful, incredibly brutal, and torturous. Finally, Win flashes a friendly smile at the teacher and asks one last question. He asks if he can pass the class now. Before the arrogant teacher can respond, our guy grabs his shoulder, threatening and reminding him that he will erase all the discrimination that he holds against healing mages. A supposedly harmless healer now looks no different from a demon lord, emphasizing that his only goal is to enjoy his classes. That means if this guy or his students bother him again, the consequences will be catastrophic. Win seals the deal with a radiant smile, ending their encounter. That night, the teacher was seen walking in a panic, hurriedly asking himself what kind of monster he had just encountered. He used to believe that all healing mages were weaklings who just followed orders from frontline mages, but this kid was completely different. He possessed top-tier combat skills and a sharp and intense aura. Coincidentally, he ran into the blonde kid who was curious about the outcome of the training. Unpissed was smirking, certain that our boy had met his end. But then he was humiliatingly shut up. The teacher was sick and tired of this rich brat's nonsense, and he urged him not to mess with Win anymore. It was for all of their own good, and their biggest mistake was assuming Win was just some run-of-the-mill healer. Unpissed was taken aback by this advice, and once again he brought up his father as a threat. But this time, the teacher wasn't scared at all. He basically told the blonde kid to go run home and cry to his daddy all he wanted. Because the truth is, if Unpissed really had that much power, he would have easily gotten rid of the healing mage long ago. The Omen family aren't Unpissed's errand boys, but one thing was for sure: if they continued to mess with this newcomer, he would destroy them completely. Unpissed stood there seething with rage, unable to believe the situation had gotten this bad. After that horrifying beatdown, a few days had passed, class had just ended. Win was feeling incredibly at ease because now he could sense the blonde noble's wariness whenever he was near. He no longer pulled any petty tricks or made snide remarks. So our boy could finally focus on his studies. However, he still wasn't satisfied with his current state. His ultimate goal was to change the future where humanity is destroyed. The only way to avoid that dark fate was, of course, to become stronger. Healing magic was helping him strengthen his body, but right now he was limiting himself to basic physical attacks. Enhancing his senses was also useful when using illusions, but it was nothing compared to the flexible fighting style of attack magic. Win understood that he needed to create a completely new fighting style to keep up. He expressed these exact thoughts to the assistant instructor, Veronica, seeking her guidance once again. Win's path needed more honing, but Veronica had something else she wanted to say first. He hesitated, unsure of what she was about to say, but it turned out she wanted to congratulate him on his achievements. Until now, thanks to his contributions, the teachers couldn't stop talking about this healing mage. A healing mage keeping up with the Academy's best classes was truly a remarkable feat. Well, of course, some teachers were jealous of his progress. That was only natural. Interestingly enough, Veronica hadn't revealed to anyone that she was the reason behind his progress. She never got a chance to mention it to the other teachers anyway, as they always looked down on her for being a special individual even among their own ranks. Our boy breathed a sigh of relief knowing that this way he wouldn't get into any trouble. It was thanks to her advice that he had gotten this far, and he didn't want to get her involved. The professor didn't mind and admitted that she was actually grateful to him. As she had said before, healing mages never try to put their theories into practice. She then drew her sword strangely. She seemed to enjoy doing that and challenged our boy Win. He clearly hadn't anticipated this move from Veronica, but she was genuinely curious to see what his current skill level was. It was the surest way to help him get stronger, but our boy wasn't prepared at all, and with panicked urgency, the swordswoman stressed that the enemy wouldn't wait, then shot forward from her position. She appeared in a flash right in front of him to cut him down. It was a blow that Win barely managed to block with his sword at the last second. He could hardly keep a grip on his weapon against her heavy attacks, and she continued to overwhelm him with a series of slashes that tore through the air. Despite using all his enhancement magic and his fastest reflexes, he still couldn't keep up with her. The problem with Veronica was that she wasn't just fast. This woman was the embodiment of a lightning bolt. Her sword flowed gracefully from one strike to the next, which meant that in a battle of endurance, Win would be the one to collapse first. Enduring the heavy blows, Win understood that he had only one chance to impress her by breaking his own speed limits. Only then could he catch her off guard. Pouring all his energy into his heels, our boy charged forward with the ferocity of a thunderclap. Just as he predicted, the professor didn't anticipate this move, and just as the blade was about to stab her in the face, she reacted at close range and countered by slicing his weapon in two. The battle was over, and despite Win's best efforts, he was still no match for the skills of an elite warrior. Veronica expressed her excitement. She hadn't expected him to be able to turn the tables so quickly. What she had just used to counter him was a magic sword. All this time, she had thought he was a healing mage who could use some attack spells, but this was something else entirely. The boy's current combat skills were already top tier, but as usual, Win wasn't satisfied with his own progress. She agreed with his ambition and his determination to become stronger, understanding that enhancement wasn't his final goal. Win admitted that he was trying to remove the limits of his body, but today's match proved that still wasn't enough. The professor offered another metaphor, that the purpose of a sword isn't just to be swung around blindly. It can thrust and it can be thrown, and healing magic must have similar applications. Unfortunately, Win had racked his brain over similar ideas, but had come up with nothing. The beautiful swordswoman explained that his weakness was his lack of real combat experience. He lacked the intuition to grasp the meaning of a fight. In Veronica's view, experience would trump knowledge, if applied correctly. Even in their recent match, Win had noticed some of the techniques she used. Understanding her advice, Win asked if he should spar with the professor more often. Veronica liked that idea, but she suggested he should participate in the monster subjugation training mission instead. The boy was bewildered. He was finally about to get first-hand experience in a life-or-death combat situation. Actually, he had participated in a similar competition between three academies, Squish, Halic, and Jinburn. All three academies prided themselves on their styles of attack, defense, and swordsmanship. Their students were tasked with carrying out subjugation requests. While at Halic Academy, he had never directly participated in a mission like this before. He had a chance to defeat terrifying monsters and gain the experience needed to face the coming apocalyptic disaster. Win steeled his resolve for the first subjugation mission of his life. Veronica watched him with amusement, not forgetting to remind him of the conditions for participation. He would have to prove his abilities in a selection test, and there were currently rumors of a genius appearing among the first-year students. Win's new goal was to defeat his peers to claim the top spot in the selection. He asked for more details about the test. The criteria were very simple. Candidates would have to fight each other. Usually, about 100 volunteers would participate and show off their skills, from which the most elite would be chosen. Even our boy was starting to get fed up with how the school constantly emphasized fighting. Back in his days at the Halic Healing Academy, only a few volunteers would step up, meaning anyone could take on a mission. But at Squish Academy, the format was completely different. They prided themselves on a rigorous selection process. Win recalled his fond memories of the Healing Academy, wondering how his respected master was doing now. Veronica then mentioned the genius student whose skill level surpassed even some of the instructors. This meant it wouldn't be easy for Win to take the top spot, which made him curious. He wondered if his instructor had ever met this student. Unfortunately, she'd never had the chance to meet him because he liked to avoid the teachers, always acting as if he was much better than them. He'd never even come to ask her a single question, but then again she did look a bit intimidating. In any case, Veronica promised Win she would help him train for the exam, which instantly lifted his spirits. She was his only chance to become stronger. Cut to the day of the selection exam. Win entered the arena telling himself how quickly time had passed. He felt more confident than ever, having completed all his preparations. As he was walking around, a familiar voice called his name. It was the chairman of the Annalum Magic Academy Alliance. The headmaster happily announced that his granddaughter was recovering very well ever since Win treated her. The chairman even apologized for not paying more attention to him, despite the fact that he'd saved his granddaughter's life. Win explained that although he'd had some trouble with the Academy's challenges, at first he had now fully integrated without any problems. In fact, he was determined to take the top spot in the selection exam, a grand goal that greatly impressed the chairman. An intruder interrupted their conversation. An instructor scoffed at Win's words, treating them as a joke. He claimed this brat was looking down on his class. Incidentally, Bode was also the proctor for this event's field training. Interestingly, Win had met this guy in his previous life. Bode was once known as the Purple Lightning, famous for his incredible heroic feats during the Great War. Unfortunately, the two of them never liked each other, and that was still true now. The arrogant, muscle-bound mage threatened the healer, stressing that this world was full of combat geniuses and that training was nothing but a grain of sand compared to the real thing. He loudly insulted Win to his face, declaring that a little healer kid like him didn't stand a chance. The teenager didn't respond, while the chairman, telling them to settle their dispute in the exam and not before it starts. The nagging instructor grumbled that he was just teaching the brat a lesson and stressed that the winner of this exam would truly be serious from his class. This guy is a straight-up copy-paste of a Genshin Impact character. Sirius Blue Note is the genius everyone is hyping up. Sas with sky-high expectations, and he's also the one our boy will definitely have to face to take first place in the selection exam. The competition is fierce, and the chairman is thrilled to see them glaring at each other like that. Wasting no time, the contestants enter the arena amidst the cheers of the crowd who are anticipating a spectacular match. Win and Erica are standing in the second row from the front. The young healer seems surprised to see she's participating too. How unlucky. She was forced to join or she'd lose her scholarship benefits at the academy. Even Unpissed is glancing at the kid from a distance. Meanwhile, the chairman officially congratulates the contestants for making it to this round, and he hopes the most talented mages will emerge victorious. The first round will be a preliminary round one designed to eliminate most of the contestants, keeping only the best for the official selection. This means they will all fight at the same time. 100 students facing off against each other. This space is too cramped for a battle, but don't worry because the chairman has used his own domain expansion to transport them to a completely different dimension. The students can't even comprehend where they've been taken, while the old man stands at the edge of the space, scattering them to different locations. Win is teleported to a forest right behind the academy. After all the students have been transported, the headmaster announces that they have been placed in random locations. The goal is to cooperate wisely and avoid overly strong opponents. Every starting position is based on luck. Win stands there amazed by the chairman's incredible teleportation skill, because this old man just teleported all of them at once. And so the practical training exam officially begins. The first thing the kid does is jump onto a tree branch. Then he activates a spell to conceal his presence. This way he erases his trail and hides, ensuring his safety from other contestants. Looking back, he sees 3 students facing off against each other. One guy is using a mighty earth golem. Honestly, it looks just like a Pokemon, while the other girl wields a giant fairy hammer. Both are so engrossed in their fight that they forget about the third attacker, a girl who has just frozen them in place. Win is impressed seeing the wide range of skills from the other offensive mages. He believes he can learn a lot from them, not just focus on winning first place. He likes what he's seen and plans to adapt it into his own skill set. The battle ends, and the last one standing is the golem user. He's standing there celebrating his victory in a spectacular match. Meanwhile, our talented kid arrives and pulls a sneak attack. Win grabs his head and activates Mind Seal, instantly taking him down. Just think of it as a mini version of Gojo's Unlimited Void. With this ability, Win can manipulate an opponent's life force and force them into unconsciousness. But he has to hold on tight or the attack won't work. This is a technique he borrowed from Veronica during their training sessions. Lost in thought, Win almost doesn't notice an incoming attack. He dodges a series of throwing knives and immediately realizes it's that moron again. This time the punk even brought his cronies along. Unpissed figures that Win is just trying to pass this exam like any other student, but he has the advantage in numbers with this 3-on-1 setup. Unpissed activates his knife creation magic. One henchman coats his dagger in poison. The other henchman uses a shadow clone spell to multiply their numbers. Even further, with these poisoned blades, just a single scratch is enough to kill him. Blocking is out of the question. Dozens of blades fly towards Win, hunting him down. As they rush in, he briefly considers using restoration magic to detoxify himself. But dealing with that many throwing knives, even with body reinforcement, would be a huge pain. Cornered, he decides to unleash a brand new move. A sudden obstacle appears in front of Win, shielding him from the blades. Unpissed is stunned to see the stone golem from before now serving a new master. A neat little trick of restoration magic is that it can be applied to other living beings. The stone golem here can move on its own thanks to the caster's blood. Although it can't perform complex commands, the healer can easily control it with a charm called false life implantation. The golem charges straight at the trio. First, our new minion smashes one guy in the chest, then it slams down on another's head, surely breaking his spine. After dealing with those two, Unpissed starts to panic. He's finished. Our boy rushes him as fast as Minato Namikaze grabs his face and puts him to sleep. The battle is over. Win goes back into stealth mode, letting his golem sweep the battlefield. Since his reinforcement techniques limit his close combat abilities, the best way is to use a golem to compensate for his critical weakness. This also allows him to observe everyone safely. Suddenly, a giant tornado catches his attention. It's as if a natural disaster just descended upon the forest. But no, this typhoon is nothing less than a real Kamehameha, an attack that our boy only narrowly escaped. The attack completely tore up the ground, crushing the golem as well as other students, and even flattened all the trees in the area. From a distance, Win sees someone serious, the genius student. And I'm not even kidding, this dude looks more like the main character than our own kid does. His abilities look terrifying at a glance. Win wonders if he should make a move and fight him. But suddenly, the match is forced to a stop. The headmaster praises the efforts of every contestant, officially ending the preliminary round. Only the 4 remaining contestants will advance to the next stage. The real battle will be held in the arena. So until then, the chairman advises the students to rest while he activates the teleportation spell. As the spell is activating Sirius, a very serious guy. Staring down our serious protagonist with a serious look of his own, Win had to find the will to defeat this guy. One day they both disappeared right after that. Back home, our resident bookworm was busy with homework, thinking up a strategy for the exam, when right outside his room, Unpissed and his goons showed up once again. They were already plenty bitter after repeatedly tasting defeat every time they challenged the healer Mage, but Unpissed was a sore loser, a bastard who cared about the pride of the nobility. And he wanted to preserve the honor of the Omen family against a lowly healer Mage. What he feared most was his father finding out about the whole thing. Even so, his friends no longer had the heart to go along with it. They abandoned him and let him deal with his own mess. Unpissed panicked and finally boiled over with rage. He declared that he had a way to get rid of the healer Mage without even using magic. Meanwhile, our boy was still relaxing in his room when he suddenly heard a knock on the door at a very strange hour. He got up to open this door and had a bad feeling. Sure enough, the person at the door was Unpissed, putting on a fancy noble act and greeting him warmly. Win was suspicious and didn't buy his acting skills. But this blonde-haired noble was just here to talk. He expressed his extreme hatred for healer mages, recounting how he had done everything he could to get Win kicked out of the academy. Of course, our boy had turned the tables in every situation and repeatedly handed him defeat. But now, Unpissed had come with a personal message. The polite facade dropped as he ordered him to leave the academy. That was enough of that terrible performance. Win was actually starting to admire this guy's persistence. I mean, he was so determined to stick to him and not let go. Unpissed smugly beat his chest, declaring himself a respected member of a noble family, and found it an eyesore to see healer mages slinking around. Even his own older brother was a weak healer mage. People mocked him, and all he could do was grin and bear it in front of them. Attack mages were full of pride, while typical healer mages were pathetically pitiful. That was the dark reality in most noble doctrines, a system full of torment. Unpissed insisted on forcing Win to leave with the power of his persuasion, but Win wasn't about to just obediently say, "Thanks, I'll drop out," so he refused him. The noble had prepared for that, and he pointed out that he knew about Win's family, thanks to his servants and connections in the outside world. The noble had discovered that Win had a younger sister, and the two of them were incredibly close. With just a single command, his servants could easily eliminate his sister if he wanted. Now the atmosphere grew much, much more tense. Win's usual indifferent expression vanished. He lunged forward and grabbed this guy by the throat. Then he slapped him, sending him tumbling to the ground. Next, he got behind him and twisted his arm into a position where it could easily be snapped. Win reminded the dear noble that he'd made his decision, and despite the nobleman whining like a dog, his arm snapped with a loud crack, leaving him to weep pathetically as the aristocrat remained determined to get revenge. He declared that the academy wouldn't forgive him for breaking his arm. But here's the interesting part. The fool forgot that Win is actually a healing mage. His arm was healed, which meant it could happily be broken all over again. A second crack rang out, making Unpissed collapse in agony. Screaming from the depths of his soul, Win healed it again, and the game continued. The noble begged again, but it was broken anyway. The cycle of breaking and healing continued, with Win mockingly asserting that he always stood by his decisions. Threatening his sister was a line that this loser never should have crossed. Snap, snap, and then snap again. The arm was repeatedly shattered until Unpissed's spirit was tortured into ruin. Now he finally understood that this kid wasn't a healer mage. He was a modern-day Satan. Just like the reality check the teacher received, the noble had learned the hard way that he couldn't mess with him anymore. That night, Win saw the noble off with a cheerful greeting as if nothing had ever happened. Our boy didn't feel a single ounce of remorse. He even felt delighted before going to sleep. The next day, the tournament officially began. Everyone in the stands was eagerly awaiting the match. The four who passed the first round would have to face each other. One of them happened to be Erica, who had shown far beyond Win's expectations. Apparently, she had surrounded herself with walls of fire, threatening anyone who dared to come near. In short, this girl didn't even have to move to win by default. But something felt off. Win didn't think that was the whole story. The girl asked him to go easy on her, but this man was no simp and intended to fight with all his might. Erica expressed that she was aiming for a much higher evaluation after defeating him, and so their epic confrontation began. Her first attack came in the form of a blazing fireball. Win countered this fire attack by taking the hit directly. It was just simple fire-type magic, nothing special. Even his healing magic could easily recover from any wounds, without any trouble. This simple move made him underestimate Erica until he realized something terrible. The same spell had just hit him, but it wasn't just an attack. It was a trap. Erica continued to launch similar attacks, firing off consecutive fireballs, but there was something special about her flames. They didn't go out at all. This woman had apparently learned Amaterasu from Itachi and copied his entire move. Though its firepower was low, its duration was unusually long. Even if he maintained his self-healing, the continuous damage would still cause him pain. This observation was also true from the last time, when he borrowed her flame to cheat on the basic attack magic test. This also explained why none of her previous opponents could get close. When she used her firewall, the flames would never truly be extinguished. Erica's fire was a symbol of her stubbornness, and her sudden display of skill captured everyone's attention. Of the crowd, that is. To be honest, they were only rooting for her because they wanted to see our boy lose. An air of arrogance washed over her with the realization that she could get past the preliminary round, and even eliminate someone as strong as Win. As she planned her counterattack, our boy casually snuffed out her flames after doubling his healing output. The girl repeated the same move again, but this time Win was prepared, knowing her flames wouldn't go out. He deliberately caught them to boost his own attack power. This was a genius combat move because now the healer had flaming fists, aiding his attacks. Just as Erica was about to be sent flying, she suddenly raised her hand to surrender and forfeit. Fortunately, she was unharmed, and the announcer declared our boy the winner of the match. Unfortunately, his evaluation score wouldn't change much, even though the match was over. The crowd that had just been supporting Erica now turned on her, calling her a fraudulent attack mage. This poor girl had been forced into a support role her entire life, and collapsed under the weight of expectations. As her dear friend helped her up, he stressed how exceptionally well she had fought. He even healed her wounds completely, winning her over. That sweet romantic moment was shattered when Professor Bode stepped onto the platform, declaring that this was the end of the line. Pointing his finger right at the healer, he made it clear he saw Win as utter trash, and was furious that an attack mage would surrender to the likes of him. The man's words terrified poor Erica, making Win wonder if this was appropriate behavior for a teacher. The old proctor boasted about his status, emphasizing that his role was to expose the truth for what it is, something he deemed commendable. But before he left, he asserted to our boy that there would be only one successful candidate from this tournament. The man he was referring to approached the healer. It was serious. The two of them had a brief chat during which Sirius didn't even deign to look at him. As they spoke, he revealed himself to be someone who only worships strength and agrees with Professor Bode's worldview. The healer had no problem with that, except the genius had one final thing to admit: he actually acknowledged that the healer was strong. But at the same time, Sirius intended to prove his philosophy was correct by defeating him in this match. Let's take a quick look back at this genius's talent. Wynn recalled hearing his name in his past life, someone with an insane level of attack magic, a person whose victories were utterly overwhelming. Nothing and no one could stand in his way without being ground to dust. The final match between Sirius and Wynn was about to begin, and the current situation showed that our boy understood that he would only be recognized by the Academy if he defeated the genius here. So, his goal was to win. The final match opened with Sirius unleashing an overwhelming tornado right from where he stood. The attack covered a massive area, forcing Wynn to cautiously dodge it. He counterattacked by pushing his speed past its limits. Wynn shot forward like a bolt of lightning, closing in on the genius with all his might. But before he could close the distance, Sirius unleashed an all-out wind attack, pushing him away. This was a real problem for our healer. He couldn't land a single critical hit. Unable to get close to his opponent, the two sources of natural power continued their fierce clash. Sirius and Wynn faced off, and Sirius recognized his speed. He raised his hand to attack, launching a violent gust of wind straight at his opponent. Our boy realized the tornado from before was nothing compared to this blast of wind. It was strong enough to blow away a huge area. He struggled to keep his feet planted on the ground, but now was the time for his new special move to make its official debut. He placed his hand on the ground and began to grow a giant tree. Meanwhile, Erica stood in the stands, amazed at the potential of healing magic, knowing he had gotten much stronger. Not long before our boy had demonstrated this skill for Professor Veronica, explaining that he had infused the tree with life force, helping it grow at a dizzying speed. He had previously researched offensive magic that could manipulate plants and decided to experiment with it using this skill. He wanted to adapt his tactics to fit the situation. Suddenly he staggered and fell to the ground, but Professor Veronica caught him in time, helping him stand firm. He was surprised by the sudden depletion of his magic, as the books didn't make it clear that this was such a power-consuming skill. Veronica pointed out the core of the problem, explaining that destruction is easier than healing, because healing requires more magic than attack magic, and replicating attack magic with healing magic was probably the least efficient way to use mana. Understanding the consequences of this skill, he planned to save it only for moments when it could be used to its fullest potential. Back in the present, our protagonist uses this skill on the battlefield. Since his offensive magic wasn't very effective, he decided to bet it all on this move. When the tree stopped growing, Sirius managed to cut it down with a wind blade. This surprised our protagonist because Sirius's magic included tornadoes that could swallow enemies, and wide-area storms that could blow things away. His wind blades were made to deal with solid objects, while the tornado spun around him to handle anyone who dared get close. Wynn realized there was a reason Sirius was called a top contender, but he also aimed to strengthen himself with this magic and dashed toward Sirius. Immediately, his opponent created a tornado around himself and spoke contemptuously, saying that no matter what he did, he would never touch him. And clearly he wasn't wrong. As soon as our boy slammed into the tornado, he was instantly thrown back. Sirius smiled smugly, but suddenly realized something was very wrong. He looked down at his shoulder and saw that it had been pierced by a piece of wood. A confused look was clear on his face as he shouted for an explanation. Wynn confidently revealed his strategy. He knew that Sirius couldn't protect the ground right under his feet, so the tree's underground roots had spread out in all directions, which is why he took a stab through the shoulder while Sirius clutched his shoulder, groaning in pain. The protagonist wondered if he was worried about Professor Bode. Because their personalities were complete opposites, Sirius made it clear that the teacher only taught him because he was strong. Our boy continued to press him with questions, knowing that he came from a prestigious clan. Sirius had no choice but to reveal the truth about his family. Magical ability was more important than anything else. The strongest would become the head of the family. No other factors like gender or age mattered at all. This created enemies within his own clan. Everyone fought and schemed for power, and even his own father refused to teach him. For Sirius, listening to his teacher was the only way he could truly achieve power and strength. Then, he once again gathered all his magical power. This astonished the entire stadium, including our protagonist. A dragon was formed from magical energy, and Sirius declared that they would settle this right now. The dragon aimed straight for our boy, making him realize this was no longer a childish game. Previously, Win thought that mages with offensive magic had an easier life. That made him want to train even harder, but it turned out he had been wrong all along. He realized a fundamental truth: talent isn't the only thing that determines superiority. Factors like bloodline, natural gifts, and one's past all play their own roles. All of this spurred him to declare bluntly to Sirius that he wanted to defeat him in this battle. Sirius was bewildered by the sudden declaration. Win placed his hands on the ground, preparing to use his special seed, and once again began to grow the tree named Gressol. The tree grew at a dizzying speed, requiring far more magic than other plants. However, its advantage was that it would continue to grow as long as our boy kept pouring magic into it. Sirius launched a wind blade attack, and once again it succeeded, splitting the tree in two and flinging it into the air. But when he looked up, the lone floating branch had sprouted into a giant tree trunk, and it was plummeting straight toward him. At the same time, Win predicted that since Sirius's magic was being used to maintain the Wind Dragon, he wouldn't have enough time to defend himself. That prediction was completely accurate, and the tree slammed down on Sirius's head. When he looked up, he saw Win standing there with a knife pointed right at him. After a moment of thought, he had to accept that he had lost. Win was announced as the winner. The stadium erupted in cheers because they couldn't believe Sirius had been defeated, and everyone was buzzing about the power our protagonist possessed. Afterwards, the hero offered a hand to help Sirius up. He praised his strength, but Sirius's tone was full of the resignation of a loser. Our boy tried to console him, admitting that it was a great match. Suddenly, Professor Bodhi walked over, his immense disappointment in Sirius showing clearly. The guy led him away, furious that Sirius had let him down, and declared loudly that his training would have to start over from scratch. The entire stadium fell silent, understanding just how harsh and heavy those words were. Bode turned to the crowd and roared, implying that this warning was for everyone. In his rage, he couldn't accept the fact that some worthless healer could take the top spot. Win realized Bode's anger was going too far. He began to defend Sirius, saying that his power was incredible and that failure didn't mean he was weak. Just as he was about to say more in his opponent's defense, Bode furiously snapped at him to shut up. Then Bode strode towards our hero. He loudly mocked the words of support he had for Sirius. He threw Sirius aside and then cursed our boy for being a fool, saying that in a battle, only power yields the best results. Overcome with emotion, he declared that a loser is no better than garbage thrown away. Win felt it was unfair for Bode to speak so harshly about his own student. He argued back that being a healer didn't give Bode the right to say whatever he wanted. Bodhi's eyes blazed with fury as he tried to crush our hero's spirit, saying he would soon be thrown into the garbage heap of the weak because the role of a healer was worthless. He continued to mock him by revealing his alarmingly depleted mana levels, which stunned our boy. Bodhi added that the weak are just parasites who indirectly kill the stronger ones. Being called a burden sent our hero into a flashback of his past, where he had been insulted and abused by Bode for not being strong enough. Even then, he tried to defend himself, insisting that healers use their magic to support others. He shouted, trying to prove his point that the world needs healers to maintain balance, otherwise humanity would be doomed. Bode let him go and recalled the sight of his student standing on the front lines to buy time for the rear guard to escape, only to be overwhelmed by weak monsters right at the exit. His student died with no way out, and Bode could only watch helplessly, tormenting himself that he couldn't heal him. He gritted his teeth, clenched his fists, and screamed that Sirius was not allowed to die for such trash. From a practical standpoint, what the professor said wasn't entirely wrong. If you are weak, you will eventually die no matter what you do, and people are forced to train to survive. However, a day will come when the monsters become vastly more ferocious, and when that happens, the strong cannot afford to be selfish and only look out for themselves, because in times like those, even the untalented must know how to fight for themselves. Back in the present, our hero challenged the professor to a one-on-one duel, hoping it would force him to acknowledge him. Bode smirked and accepted the challenge, confident that there was no way a worthless healer could possibly defeat him. Hearing this, the referee was horrified and asked if Bode was actually serious about the challenge. Bode shamelessly bent the rules to his will. With no other choice, the referee had Sirius carried away. The special match between Win and Bode was announced, and just moments later, the battle began. Bode cracked his knuckles, boasting that he would show our boy just how truly weak he was. With the little mana he had left, Win couldn't help but worry as he faced his strongest opponent yet. He began to plan carefully, as this was no ordinary duel. Just as he was about to start, Bode yelled, criticizing him for being too slow, and launched an attack. The light from the magic was so brilliant it lit up the entire arena. He then boasted that he would teach him the 3 reasons why his victory was assured. A massive torrent of mana erupted as he stated his first reason leveraging distance to overwhelm the enemy. The second reason was speed, leaving the opponent with no time to react. The third reason was power to finish the enemy in a single blow. As Bode was about to continue, he sarcastically remarked that our hero probably couldn't even hear him anymore. But our boy stood up once again, asking where that single finishing blow power was now. Though his injuries were visible, he stood tall and defiant. Knowing that the professor possessed a one-of-a-kind lightning magic, he had to find a way to avoid a direct hit to his body to protect himself from the electrical damage. He was aware that all his skills would be useless if his brain or heart were hit, as his healing magic wouldn't be fast enough to work for that very reason. He had created a blood path that could easily conduct electricity. He stabbed a knife into his own hand so that when the current hit the blade, it would travel through his limbs and straight into the ground, minimizing the damage he sustained. Even so, withstanding the electrical attacks was incredibly difficult. Now it was our boy's turn to counterattack. Bode looked down on him, saying he felt sorry for him, seeing him just struggling to survive the attack. Win then began to enhance his physical abilities with magic, but suddenly realized he could no longer channel power into his body. Bode revealed that his death lightning magic paralyzes its victims, rendering them completely immobile. Win realized he was in deep trouble and raised his hand again as another attack hurtled toward him. With his arrogant nature, Bode wanted to use his remaining mana to see how many more hits our hero could take. Bode launched an attack that shook the entire stadium while our boy continued to brace himself and endure. He understood that the professor truly possessed a unique, incredibly powerful and flawless magic which fed his arrogance, but our hero refused to give up. He was determined to win. Pouring every last drop of his mana and stamina into manipulating his magic, he slammed his hand on the ground and instantly grew a Dieffenbachia. This plant is capable of absorbing a huge amount of water from the ground and storing it inside, so if used as a shield, the electric current would be easily dispersed. However, fate had a cruel twist in store. Bode easily cut the plant down with his lightning attack, stunning the crowd. Our boy stood there shocked as Bode began to walk towards him. He was certain that our hero had no more tricks up his sleeve. But when Bode looked down at the fallen trunk, he saw mushrooms sprouting at an incredible rate. It truly shocked him. Our boy let out a silent sigh of relief. His special skill had worked, as mushrooms grow very quickly after being struck by lightning. When a forest is turned into a wasteland after a thunderstorm, it creates an ideal growing environment with no natural predators, and mushrooms are one of the first organisms to appear. But that wasn't their only advantage. They also have the ability to paralyze the body, and Bode was experiencing it firsthand. He panicked, and our boy seized the opportunity, knowing that the distance advantage between them had finally been broken. He channeled his strength into his fist and charged straight at Bode, but he managed to dodge and counter with a devastating blow to his stomach. He revealed that he was also skilled in close combat and that his unique magic allowed him to control electric currents on a deeper level. He declared that if he used electricity to enhance his body and increase his speed, that little paralysis trick was nothing. Lying on the ground, clutching his chest, unable to accept the fact that he might not win, the arrogant Bode clenched his fist, declaring himself the winner of the duel. But just before he could bring his fist down, someone stopped him. He turned to see Professor Veronica glaring at him, and he tried to push her away. He told her that a rookie like her shouldn't interfere. Our boy trembled slightly, but a spark of hope ignited when he saw Veronica. She argued that the outcome of the match was already clear, and that beating the boy any further would only cause unnecessary pain. Bode tried to justify it, arguing that since Win is a healing mage, he could just heal himself. Veronica defended our boy, insisting that he didn't have any mana left, because he had poured everything into the previous duels. Angered, Bode prepared to charge in and attack again, claiming Veronica didn't have the guts to see it through. Veronica immediately channeled power into her sword, and the two rushed at each other, ready to strike. Suddenly, the headmaster appeared, ending the brawl. He stood between the two. He stopped Bode from advancing and apologized to Veronica for not explaining the situation sooner. He declared the selection exam over and requested that everyone leave the area. As the students began to disperse, our boy tried to heal himself, but failed as his mana was completely depleted. Veronica lifted Win into her arms and gently told him he had done very well. She advised him to rest and not to overexert himself, but those words of comfort weren't enough for him. The next day, he walked through the school grounds, his thoughts consumed by the power gap. He still couldn't understand how humanity could have been wiped out when there were such strong people around, and so he resolved to become even stronger. Win entered the headmaster's office, who was pleased to see him and noticed that his wounds had recovered considerably. The boy explained that as soon as his mana recovered, the healing process was almost instantaneous. The headmaster guessed that Win wouldn't have any trouble with the field training. This came as a surprise to our protagonist. He went on to explain that because Win had secured the top spot in the selection exam he had passed. Along with him, Sirius and Erica had also passed the exam. Win demanded an explanation because before that, Bodhi had declared that everyone failed. The headmaster calmly explained that this sort of thing happens every year. It's done to make the students believe they're in a crisis, forcing them to show their seriousness. Even so, a few are still allowed to pass because the field training holds countless dangers. Bodhi had to play this role of a cruel teacher, and despite its harshness, it achieved its purpose. In his past life, Bodhi constantly fought on the front lines for humanity, and he was one of the heroes who tried to save mankind from the brink of extinction. The headmaster then encouraged our protagonist to form a party with students from other academies with him as the main damage dealer so he could take on real monster subjugation quests. This made Win realize that this would be the first time he would directly confront the monsters, the very beings who had caused humanity's doom in his past life. Creatures that possess mana are called monsters, but not all monsters are born a threat to humans. Some may attack people, but usually only out of survival instinct. If their ecological behavior were properly studied, they could have coexisted as friendly creatures instead of being seen as enemies. However, in 2 years' time, the world will undergo a transformation under the influence of the blood moon. Monsters exposed to the blood moon will become violent, and various supermonster species will begin to form alliances, with a single goal to wipe out all of humanity. Then 2 years after that catastrophe, the Demon King himself will descend upon the mortal world. This chain of events will push humanity into a state of extreme disadvantage, causing nations to fall and countless lives to be lost. Attack mages will be highly valued on the battlefield, but because the situation will spiral out of control, they will fall one by one alongside the knights. Even healing mages will be slaughtered when the front lines collapse, leaving the injured with no one to support them. By the time our protagonist died in his past life, almost no one capable of fighting was left. If humans continue to live without changing, humanity will no longer be able to survive. He cannot let such a tragedy repeat itself. He vows to train himself to be stronger than anyone in his previous life, so he can fight back against the invasion of tens of thousands of monsters. Furthermore, he wants to uncover the true cause behind the blood moon phenomenon that drove the monsters mad, hoping to eradicate the root cause of this calamity. The headmaster noticed the blazing fire of determination in his eyes and was deeply impressed. He felt Win's attitude was very promising, and at the same time wondered if the teachers had prepared well enough for the upcoming field training. The headmaster assured him that appropriate measures had been put in place, but he also expressed a special desire to foster Win's growth. Later, as he was standing on the school grounds with Veronica, Bodhi walked towards our protagonist. When Win tried to show that he understood the reasons behind Bodhi's actions, the man yelled at him once again and walked away. However, before leaving, he still told Win to do his best in the training, and then just as he turned to leave, he quietly thanked him for healing Sirius. Sirius, who had been standing behind him the whole time, also stepped forward and thanked Win. He said that he was now able to overcome his weaknesses and become stronger than ever. As long as he's alive, he knows he can definitely get his revenge, and this time it won't all turn to dust. Our protagonist urged him on. He had to become even stronger, and the two of them shook hands as a silent agreement. For Win, having more talented attack mages appear was an advantage, because they would be priceless allies in the upcoming battles with monsters. Shortly after setting off in a horse-drawn carriage, they were informed that they were approaching the Donkul forest, and that the details of the training would be shared soon. Veronica explained that they would be fighting goblins as part of their assigned mission in the forest, Dankul. She continued to instruct the 3 students from Swash Helix and Jinburn. Then she turned to Win and informed him that he would be forming a 4-person party supported by a teacher from one of the academies. Erica asked if the team members had been decided yet, and Veronica reassured her that she would be on the same team as her. Although Erica found Veronica quite intimidating, she still thought it was much better than running into someone else, with a complete stranger. A moment later, they were told they had arrived. As they stepped out of the carriage, Veronica noticed that students from Jinburn were already in the area. The main character reflected that in his past life he didn't have many acquaintances or relationships. Suddenly, a girl rushed forward and threw her arms around Win, exclaiming how much she had been longing to see him. Our hero was startled and completely confused, not knowing who this girl was. She quickly introduced herself as Mary Go Grand, the granddaughter of Analung Go Grand, the headmaster of Swast Academy. He was utterly stunned by her introduction, as he still remembered her vividly from his past life. He never expected to meet the girl he had once treated. At the headmaster's house again, especially not in the middle of this forest. Seeing her again made him wonder how she had been doing, and she quickly reassured him that she was doing very well. Almost immediately, she began to apologize, saying she never got the chance to thank him properly back then. He casually waved it off, saying it was nothing, but she insisted on doing something to repay his kindness. She explained that she had absolutely no talent for magic, so she enrolled at Jinburn Academy and dedicated herself to swordsmanship. Thanks to her relentless efforts, she eventually became the top student in the Academy's selection exam. She let out a little giggle when she saw the impressed look on our hero's face. He was genuinely moved by her accomplishment because just a few months ago she had been bedridden. Yet in such a short time she had risen to the top. Taking his hand, she told him they had been placed on the same team due to their respective talents, and that she would do her best to prove she could be useful to him. It was only then that he truly understood the deeper meaning behind the headmaster's words about taking care of her. Before he could think any further, she suddenly pulled him along to say hello to the newly arrived students from Helix. Watching from the sidelines, Veronica and Erica couldn't help but be surprised by how cheerful and close the two of them seemed outside the Helix carriage. Mary called out, asking if Ulin and Turf were inside. Ulin slowly stepped out and calmly said there was no need to rush. He cheerfully greeted everyone and introduced himself as the teacher assigned to lead their team. Ulin was a teacher at Helix Academy, and in Wynn's past life he had been the greatest healing mage of his time. Realizing he was now on the same team as him filled Wynn's heart with genuine happiness. Then Turf also stepped out of the carriage, and Mary proactively introduced herself to him. However, Turf froze when he realized the two of them were holding hands. Naturally, he asked to be introduced to our hero. Wynn introduced himself, and Turf quickly assumed that he must be an attack mage. Ulin then spoke to the students, saying they were free to do whatever they wanted, and he would just quietly observe them. This laid-back attitude surprised all the students. Wynn walked over to Ulin and asked if he could call him Master. Ulin asked why, and Wynn explained that he also used healing magic, but had never had a proper teacher to help him practice and hone. He then asked if Ulin would be willing to teach him. Ulin said that he had heard about Wynn before, and happily agreed to teach him some healing magic. Mary quickly ran after them, insisting that if Wynn was going to call him that, then she should be allowed to call him Master too. From the side, Veronica observed that the teams seemed to be getting along very well. Later, when the subjugation mission was assigned, each team was instructed to use a tent as their base of operations. The goblin area was deep within the forest, so Ulin, Mary, and Wynn decided to head there immediately. Meanwhile, the healing mage Turf was instructed to stay at the base away from the front lines, as was traditional combat doctrine. As they advanced toward the goblin concentration area, Mary asked Wynn if he was really just going to act as a healing mage on the front lines. He calmly replied, telling her not to worry about him. He explained that instead, he would act as the group's supervisor, allowing them to fight freely while he carefully observed everything. Taking his words seriously, they both accepted that a supervisor isn't bound by any strict rules. They immediately began hunting the goblins. With a single decisive movement, Mary cut down a large group of goblins at once. Our hero could hardly believe his eyes. He remembered that just a few months ago she was still lying paralyzed in a hospital bed. In the next scene, the blonde-haired Mary took down countless more goblins with powerful, sword strikes. Seeing her, our hero Wynn was utterly amazed and realized she was fully capable of clearing the entire area by herself. However, more and more goblins suddenly swarmed in. Seeing the situation, his master Ulin remarked that while the blonde girl was excellent at sweeping attacks, she struggled when overwhelmed by numbers. He ordered our hero to support her in the fight. This made him feel incredibly excited, as it had been a while since he'd fought monsters. Activating his magic, he rushed forward and began taking down the goblins in a flash. After focusing his power to eliminate them, he thought of the dagger that Professor Veronica, the white-haired instructor, had given him. He noted its extraordinary sharpness and how much it had helped in the battle. The blonde girl was also in awe of Wynn's skills, and their master announced that the day's mission was complete. They should head back. Just then, the blonde girl noticed her body felt much lighter than before. Our hero explained that it was thanks to their master's healing abilities. He realized this master's true strength lay in his recovery magic, which he used so subtly that people often didn't even notice, even if the world refused to acknowledge it. He still believed that his master was the greatest healing mage in this world. That night, when they returned to their lodging, the young man named Tough was relieved to see them, realizing that no one was injured in that day's mission. The blonde girl said that she understood their master was an excellent healing mage, but she wondered why. He also seemed so knowledgeable about frontline combat. He explained that the front lines are where the most people get injured, and by treating them there, he naturally accumulated practical knowledge over time. Toph added that their master frequently traveled between different locations, which was why he rarely taught regular classes. Hearing this, the main character thought to himself that his master never shied away from danger when it came to saving lives. He realized that losing someone like him would be an immense loss for humanity. He also knew there was still time before his master's death, which was destined to happen in the future, but in order to change that fate, he was determined not to let that tragedy repeat itself in this life. Meanwhile, while they were enjoying a peaceful evening at home, a horde of goblins was gathering in a hidden lair, planning their next move to spread more destruction. Afterward, the main character and his party once again set out on a goblin subjugation mission. They applied what they had learned from previous battles, and their teamwork became more coordinated. However, during a routine sweep, Master Jen suddenly told everyone to turn back. The main character was confused by this decision, because they hadn't encountered or defeated a single monster that day. The master then explained that goblins are highly territorial creatures. If outsiders enter their area, they usually attack immediately, just like the other day. But despite having gone this deep into their territory, they still hadn't seen a single goblin. This indicated that something was wrong. He decided they should retreat and regroup with the other parties. The blonde girl pointed out that Professor Veronica's team had a base nearby, so they could head there for safety. A short while later, they arrived at the other party's camp. To their astonishment, they found Erica, the main character's classmate, tied up with ropes. Seeing this, the blonde girl rushed forward to save her friend, but as she approached, she suddenly fell into a hidden pit trap. At the same time, a volley of arrows shot towards the master, but the main character deflected them all in an instant. He then realized that a large number of goblins had surrounded them for an attack. The blonde girl also managed to climb out of the pit, and the two of them prepared to counterattack. However, the main character wondered why things had turned out this way. This kind of unusual monster activity should have only erupted after the appearance of the Blood Moon, an event that was still 2 years away. Seeing the situation worsening, he unleashed his power and summoned countless wooden golems. He instructed Mary not to engage directly, but to attack from the rear while the golems held off the goblin horde. She found an opening and unleashed a powerful slash that tore through the ground instantly, finishing off countless enemies, and any who tried to approach her were cut down by our main character. Seeing their smooth coordination, the teacher was very pleased and moved to save Erica. But just as he stepped forward, a powerful leader monster suddenly burst up from the ground to attack him. Seeing this, the main character grew worried because he couldn't let his teacher die like that. But to his surprise, as the monster lunged, the teacher gracefully dodged the attack. Seizing the opportunity, he placed a magic circle on the creature's back, causing it to collapse instantly. The main character asked how he was able to do that. The teacher explained that he had learned this movement skill from him. However, he clarified that he only put the monster to sleep because he was a healer and didn't fight to kill his enemies. Afterward, they quickly brought the main character's classmate to a safe area while escaping the goblin territory. The teacher used healing magic on her, and soon she regained consciousness. Our main character then asked what had happened and why she was alone. Erica explained that the mission the day before had gone smoothly, but things often went wrong when she let her guard down. When she woke up that morning, Professor Veronica had disappeared, leaving only a note telling her to stay vigilant in the area. While she was discussing the situation with her two companions, they told her to go look for the professor. She added that as soon as she entered the forest, she smelled a sweet scent that made her pass out. Hearing her explanation, the teacher realized the goblins had likely used a sleeping potion on her. He also grew concerned because it seemed the goblins were cooperating with an ogre, which was highly unusual. However, he said there was no more time to analyze the situation. They had to go to Erica's base first and regroup with her two friends. A short time later, they arrived at the base only to find it completely destroyed. The blonde girl wondered how this could have happened since goblins are highly territorial and usually never leave their area. This meant a base outside their territory should have been safe. Seeing this, the main character realized it was a calculated attack deliberately targeting humans, a behavior his master had said was usually only seen after the Blood Moon event. He then used his sensory ability to discover that two of his companions had fled elsewhere. He ordered the group to split up, saying he would go find them himself. Meanwhile, the main character and the girls would go to the boy turf and leave the forest. The main character agreed to the plan, and when they reached the rest stop, they were relieved to see the boy was still safe. He was preparing food for them. Win told him they would explain everything later, as they needed to leave the area immediately. However, as they stepped out of the house, they were stunned to see the giant goblin from before standing there with a large army of goblins. Seeing this, the main character told the girls that the three of them had to fight and destroy the monsters right now, as he believed they were fully capable of winning this battle. He instructed the blonde girl not to push too far forward, like before telling her to just focus on launching basic attacks. Then, he used summoning magic to create a wooden golem and ordered his female classmate to block the goblins with fire-based attacks. Following his instructions, she unleashed a flame that trapped most of the goblins for a short time. However, our main character noticed the giant goblin could still walk through the fire, completely unharmed, so he immediately ordered the golem to act. As the golem grabbed the giant goblin, the blonde girl found an opening and unleashed a powerful sword strike, knocking the giant goblin backward. She felt exhilarated because their coordination was working perfectly. But to their astonishment, the giant goblin began to regenerate its body. Hui realized that continuous attacks wouldn't be enough to take it down. He understood they needed a new strategy to defeat this monster. While he was contemplating his next move, the giant goblin suddenly threw another goblin at him, but he parried the attack and cut it down. Instantly, the blonde girl also knocked back a few goblins and shouted that she would follow the main character's instructions precisely. Hearing our main character realized that with Erica holding back the goblin army and the blonde girl providing support from the front, he just needed to focus on the giant goblin. He charged straight at the creature. The main character slashed at its body, enraging the monster, but he found an opening and cast rampant life magic on the giant goblin's back. Thanks to this attack, the giant goblin's body exploded and it was defeated instantly. Seeing this, the main character realized the monster could no longer regenerate, and now only the goblin army was left to deal with. A short while later, they finally finished off the remaining goblins and felt proud of their efforts. However, the main character was still wondering about the whereabouts of the other teams. Suddenly, he saw a tornado in the distance and realized that Sirius the Whirlwind Kid was creating it. The main character decided that following the tornado would lead them to the other teams. After some effort, they reached the location where the Whirlwind Kid and the other teams had defeated even more goblins. The strongest teacher then asked about the main character's master. Just then, the master appeared with the two students who had gone missing earlier. The main character was incredibly relieved to see him, and his master also congratulated him on defeating the giant goblin unscathed. The strongest teacher was relieved that everyone was safe, but wondered about Professor Venerica's whereabouts. He said they couldn't leave the area until she returned. The master offered to stay behind to watch over the other students and suggested that those capable of handling themselves should go look for her. Hearing this, the strongest teacher assigned this task to Sirius and our main character, as they were both strong enough to handle it. Heading into the forest, the main character enhanced his hearing and immediately pinpointed Professor Venerica's location. She was completely unharmed. However, he was shocked to see a red stone in her hand. It was the very stone linked to the blood moon. The professor asked him what he was doing there. The main character explained that he came to find her because the monsters in the area had gone berserk, and they needed to retreat urgently. She agreed with him, but he then asked why she was holding the stone. She apologized to him, saying she couldn't explain right now, but assured him that she wasn't doing anything wrong. Afterwards, they returned to their companions together, and the whole group headed back to the academy. The next day, the main character wondered if the professor was connected to the blood moon or not, but he realized he couldn't suspect her, as she had been his trusted comrade in his past life. While lost in thought, he happened to see Professor Venerica talking to an upperclassman at the school about something important. As he got closer, he saw her requesting a leave of absence for personal reasons. When she left, the main character realized her actions were definitely related to the blood moon. To find out the truth, he decided to follow her and see what she would do next. After secretly tailing her for a while, the main character finally arrived in a town. He told himself he was only doing this to clear Professor Veronica's name. Looking around, he recalled that in his past life after graduating from the Healer's Academy, monster activity had become a serious problem, and he was dispatched to battlefields across various regions. He was certain he had set foot in this very town before. Just then he saw Professor Veronica buying honey bread from a shop. Seeing this, he recalled a memory from his past life when he shared this very bread with her. Back then, he had said he grew up in the countryside and rarely got to eat delicious things like this. But the professor, who came from a merchant family in the city, got to enjoy them often. She explained that always stopping by bakeries whenever she saw one was a personal habit of hers. She shared that she never knew when her life would end, so she preferred to enjoy every moment in the present. And then she asked him if he would protect her if something serious happened, and the protagonist had confirmed he would. Remembering those moments, the protagonist realized he had promised to always be by her side, yet in the end, he couldn't protect her. However, in this life, he was determined to change that fate, and to do that, he had to uncover the truth behind her actions. While tailing her, he saw the professor enter a strange church. The protagonist once again activated his presence concealment skill to continue hiding and sneak inside after her. Inside the church, she met a purple-haired thug. He announced that she had been summoned here for a very important matter. He demanded she hand over the item they had discussed earlier, and so the professor handed over the red stone. Seeing it, the thug was utterly astonished. He said that with this item, their cult's long-held goal would soon be realized, as they were once again approaching the blood moon. Hearing this, the protagonist understood that this situation was indeed related to the blood moon. However, at that very moment, his concealment skill wore off, and so a water dragon sensed his presence and lunged to attack. But the professor stepped in front of the protagonist, saving him from the blow. The purple-haired thug said he had made it clear she was to come alone. He then demanded to know why she brought this kid with her. He expressed his disappointment, saying he truly believed she could become a new member of their cult. The professor explained that the protagonist's presence here was just a coincidence. The thug then said that if they killed Win right here, the cult would still accept her without any issues. However, she flatly refused to join them and declared she was only there to investigate the situation. Hearing this, the protagonist was confused, not knowing what was happening. The professor then explained that on the day she left the base, she had sensed something unusual in the forest. There she found a monster going berserk and a red stone. When she channeled her mana into the stone, it began to glow a brilliant red, and just then this thug suddenly appeared. He told her that if she wanted to know the truth about the stone and their identities, she had to accept two conditions. First, she had to keep the red stone glowing, as they would use it to test her abilities. Second, she couldn't tell anyone about this, and she had to follow them to a designated location to prove her trustworthiness. The professor then said this was why she planned to infiltrate and investigate to expose that man's identity and his organization. Hearing this, he breathed a sigh of relief, realizing she wasn't a bad person. The thug then confirmed that her earlier declaration of wanting to join their organization was just a lie. He threw the red stone into the water, causing several water dragons to go berserk and prepare to attack. Seeing the situation worsen, he spoke up, saying he could easily handle half of them. However, the professor charged forward and beheaded all the dragons with a single sword strike. But surprisingly, the dragons began to regenerate as if they were still alive, despite suffering fatal wounds. Seeing this, he charged at one of the dragons and stabbed it with his dagger. As he struck, he noticed something strange. The dragon's body felt unusually soft. Realizing something was off, he told the professor to back away so he could test something. Activating his physical enhancement skill, then Win yanked the dragon, causing the creature to instantly reveal its true form. In reality, the dragons weren't real. They were just the tentacles of an octopus-like monster, a giant one attacking them from the shadows. Seeing that the real monster had been exposed, the thug clicked his tongue and said he'd have to join the fight himself. That's why he drew a mighty spear to attack the two of them. He instructed the professor to handle the octopus monster, explaining that her magic sword would be much more effective against its soft body. When she seemed hesitant, he used his physical enhancement skill on her and reassured her that he'd be right back after dealing with the thug. He then dashed toward the thug at breakneck speed and attacked with his dagger. However, the thug easily blocked the blow and retaliated with his spear, forcing him to slide backward. Even so, the thug realized he had managed to leave a small scratch on his face. He immediately used healing magic to mend the wound in an instant. Seeing this professor, Veronica told him that this guy was just like him, someone who could both heal and fight. The thug spoke up, praising his natural talent, and he offered to introduce him to the others in his organization. He asked if he was interested in joining, but he refused, declaring he would never become their lackey. Hearing that, the thug declared that in that case, he would just have to kill him here. He charged again, thrusting his spear, but Win easily parried it. As he fought, he thought to himself that there was still so much he didn't understand, like that organization. The red stone possessed the nature of both healing and attack magic, but he was certain that if he could defeat this guy, he could uncover the truth of the matter and prevent the coming tragedy. With that thought, he unleashed a powerful kick that sent the thug staggering back, witnessing his strength. The guy realized that if this continued, he would be the one tasting defeat. So he activated a skill called body corruption, causing his right arm to transform into a monstrous shape. Win understood that this was far beyond normal physical enhancement or healing magic. He fiercely demanded to know who had taught him such techniques. The thug revealed that everything he learned came from the teachings of his organization. He lamented that before joining, he had lived without purpose as a healer in a magic squad, and all he did was obey his arrogant superiors. He believed that this world was full of people not worth saving, and the organization had given him both purpose and power, finally allowing his life to shine. Hearing this, Win exposed that what he was doing was completely wrong, warning that if this continued, countless innocent people would die. With that said, he tried to attack again, but the thug blocked it far too easily. He then swung his giant arm, punching Win so hard he was sent flying into a wall. Win suddenly remembered his master Jen, Professor Veronica, and all the people he had lost in his past life. Thanks to those memories, he forced himself to stand up and used healing magic to recover his wounds. At the same time, he coldly stated that now he would never forgive him and would make him die in agony. The two charged at each other again, trading furious blows, but he managed to inflict significantly more damage. Seizing an opening, he landed a powerful punch straight to the thug's chin, sending him reeling backward with fatal injuries. He then turned to look at Professor Veronica and saw she had defeated the octopus monster with her sword skills. She explained that the creature's regeneration ability was too strong. That's why it took so long to take it down. Win then walked over to the critically injured thug to interrogate him. Placing a dagger to his neck, he demanded to know who the organization was and what their true purpose was. However, the man remained stubbornly silent. Unwilling to betray his superiors, he instead suddenly plunged the dagger into his own neck, ending his own life. For a fleeting moment, he felt a sense of relief, realizing he had been loyal to his comrades until the very end. But then suddenly, he was resurrected and all his wounds vanished without a trace, utterly horrified. He wondered what the hell had just happened, as he still vividly remembered the agony of approaching death. Win then spoke up, explaining that he had healed him the very moment he stopped breathing. Hearing this, the thug stammered that a normal healer couldn't possibly do that. But Win firmly asserted that he was anything but normal and would one day become the greatest healer in the world. He warned that he could repeat this process, killing and then healing him as many times as he wanted. He ordered him to spill everything about the organization. Utterly terrified, the thug realized he had no choice but to tell the truth. However, a strange phenomenon suddenly occurred with his body. Seeing this, the professor urgently shouted a warning for him to back away immediately. Just then, the thug's body suddenly exploded, killing him instantly. Win tried to heal him, but was helpless to do anything, realizing his life force had completely vanished. He felt terrible knowing they had lost their only chance to gather information. Even so, Professor Veronica reassured him that at least he was safe and suggested they should now return to the SWAT Academy. On the way back, she said that in any case, they had learned a few important things, including the existence of these strange phenomena in the world. She added that she was glad she had joined this field training exercise. She confessed that she had insisted on coming along only because she was worried about Win. Then our protagonist asked her how. She had come up with the idea of using static magic for an attack. She explained that she came from a family of merchants, so she had many opportunities to interact with both healers and attack mages. She mentioned that she had also heard someone talk about similar ideas when she was little. While they were chatting, she suddenly noticed a bakery and invited him to buy some bread with her. After enjoying a rare moment of peace together, they returned to the academy where Win received a light scolding for leaving without permission. Elsewhere, the snake woman entered a room and discovered that her pet snake had killed a young boy inside. Glancing at the red stone, she declared that she would follow the organization's orders at all costs and spread as much destruction as possible.